Welcome to On the Agenda, Steptoe's guide to state attorneys general and other enforcement, regulation, and compliance matters. From AI to smokestacks, consumer protection to financial services, data privacy to antitrust. Join Steptoe's seasoned litigators, counselors, and advisors as they deliver the critical insights and industry knowledge that government officials respect and that companies, nonprofits, and executives can use to navigate whatever legal challenges they face.
Hi, and welcome to On the Agenda. I am Michelle Kallen, a partner at Steptoe's DC office, representing clients in new and evolving areas of law. I come to Steptoe by way of the state AG world, where I served in the Virginia office of the Attorney General as Solicitor General of Virginia. I am joined today by my co-chair in the appellate practice, Shannen Coffin. Hi, Shannen.
Hey, Michelle.
Shannen is a former senior lawyer in the Justice Department Civil Division and also served as counsel to the Vice President in the Bush administration. Our guest today is Stephen Cox, the Attorney General of Alaska. A.J. Cox brings a rare blend of federal and private sector experience to the role, having previously served as a United States attorney, a senior official at the U.S. Department of Justice, and a top lawyer in the energy sector, including as principal attorney for Apache Alaska. Appointed by Governor Dunleavy, A.G. Cox leads Alaska's legal effort with a focus on public safety, regulatory integrity, and constitutional governance. His background in federal enforcement and private industry gives him a unique vantage point on the challenges facing Alaska, from environmental and energy law to tribal sovereignty and federal-state dynamics. We're excited to speak with A.G. Cox about how his diverse experience informs his leadership, how Alaska is navigating today's fast-moving legal landscape, and what checks and balances look like from the perspective of a state attorney general. Welcome, A.G. Cox.
Well, thanks for having me, Michelle and Shannen. It's good to be on this podcast. This is my second podcast ever, but they both occurred this week. I'm happy to be here. Shannen and I go way back, and we both served in the Bush administration. He had the two hardest jobs in the government, running federal programs and working for Vice President Cheney.
General Cox, and let me just stop right there because you've told me before, don't call me General. Tell me about that.
That's right. Well, I think general is the adjective. And so up here in Alaska, they don't do General Cox. They just call me A.G. Cox. My kids call me Attorney Daddy. We go with the British tradition. Margaret Thatcher called her Attorney General attorney.
Right. Just Attorney Cox.
That's right.
Well, let's talk about, we do go way back. So let's talk about how you became Attorney General of Alaska. And that's a really recent development. I mean, at the time we're taping, I think you're the newest Attorney General in the country, but you're not from Alaska, right?
That's right. So I was born in Louisiana, grew up in Texas, clerked in Georgia. I worked in Washington, D.C., and Virginia, in Texas. And then we moved to Alaska about 4.5 years ago. After I stepped down from the Trump administration, we decided to make Alaska our home. I was looking for a general counsel role or a deputy general counsel role. And an old friend of mine had moved here 15 years ago. He and I worked together at WilmerHale in DC. And he reached out and asked me if I wanted to be a general counsel for this investment group that he had founded. I came up in January 2020. Because I thought I needed to see what it was like or feel what it was like when it gets down to below 0 degrees. And because I grew up in Houston, not used to that. And so I fell in love with the place. I realized I had several friends here, friends of mine from college, friends from the media, friends from past jobs. And I saw right away there was a great place to raise a family. And I also wanted to have a hobby again. And so I'd gone 20 years without a hobby. And I asked Christina if I could have a hobby again, and it would be fly fishing. And I told her she was allowed to make fun of me, but that's what I do for fun. I just went this past Saturday with my father, my brother, and my brother-in-law. And we caught a bunch of rainbow trout. It was terrific.
So your path to Alaska certainly didn't contemplate becoming the lead law enforcement officer in the state. You're in an appointed position, right?
That's correct.
How did that happen?
It was definitely not in the plan. Coming from Texas and living in a bunch of places where the attorneys general are elected, that's typically how attorney general take office. I didn't even think about it because I never wanted to run for office, and it's a great job. And I have some friends who have that job in other states, but moving to Alaska, that's when I met the attorney general, realized he was part of the governor's cabinet, and it was appointed. But I didn't meet the governor until a little over a year ago. We hit it off. I think the first time we met, we spent 4 hours together over dinner, talked about a lot of things. I realized that he was a visionary and a lot of ideas, very creative. He was also a walking encyclopedia of Alaskan history. And maybe that's because he's a former teacher. And I really enjoyed working with him, just sort of on the side, trying to brainstorm ideas that he could bring to the table on the public policy side of things. And when he called me, I think it was in May, and he asked me if I would serve as the next attorney general. He thought the then current attorney general might be stepping down later in the fall. And I told him I would be absolutely honored and thrilled, the chance to work in this role. This is going to be the best job I think I'll ever have. I'm only 7 or 8 weeks in, but I love every day, and it's a privilege to be in this role.
So you bring a wealth of experience as a federal attorney with your background in federal government. What has the transition been like now to being a state government attorney?
It's interesting. 4 or 5 months ago, back in May, when I was thinking about the role, I think I've always struggled with this thing that now we call imposter syndrome. I don't really belong in any of the jobs that I've actually had. And probably 4 or 5 months ago, I remember thinking, gosh, I'm going to have to study up on all these Alaska statutes that I'm not an expert in. And then I stepped into the role, and then I remembered, I had this kind of opportunity in Washington, D.C. when I was in the Associate Attorney General's office. That's a leadership office at the Justice Department, and you're overseeing a wide swath of litigation in areas that you could never have expertise in all of these things, from environmental to civil rights to Administrative Procedure Act litigation to torts, antitrust, and consumer protection. Those are not easy areas of law to just sort of pick up. You've got civil defense. I served in the Trump administration, and I don't know if you knew this, there were a lot of lawsuits against the Trump administration. And so, we had a lot of federal program litigation, defense, a lot of affirmative civil enforcement, a lot of white collar criminal work. I oversaw all of the federal grant making out of the Justice Department, which is its own animal. I served on the Regulatory Reform Task Force and was the executive director of that task force at DOJ. And so that was all about regulatory overreach. And so the reason I was able to, I think, be successful at DOJ is I was surrounded by a building full of experts who were eager to help, and some of the finest lawyers I've ever worked with. And when I took this job, it was a similar sort of thing. I would have meetings with lawyers who were just brilliant and the best lawyers in Alaska on these areas of very complex, very unique to Alaska, complicated statutes and regulations. And if you're a good team player and you can issue spot and you can work well with others, all the background that I had from DOJ is really translatable to this job.
We've actually did some work with your office in the last couple of years on federal mining regulations, and found that your lawyers were incredibly knowledgeable and added a great deal to supporting the Department of Interior regulations that have been challenged for over a decade and winning in the DC circuit. So
Yep.
How big is your staff?
So we probably have about 700 employees, give or take, about 300 lawyers, 150 on the civil side, 150 on the criminal side.
And let's get back to, there are about 7 unelected attorney generals in the country. You're in a really unique situation. You're part of the cabinet and you're the governor's counsel as well. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Tell me about that role.
That's right. It is unlike any other attorney general role, and for a number of reasons. You're right. I'm one of the few, it's probably 6 or 7 appointed attorneys general, and the governor doesn't have his own general counsel. So I serve as a general counsel to the governor.
You feel like you wear different hats when you're doing different jobs?
It's a little bit like that, but I think when you're so focused on getting the law right and understanding, what are the guardrails outside of which you really can't operate, but within which you can, it's a little bit easier and more comfortable. I mean, in some respects, it's like the federal government. It's just a little bit more unitary. For example, in the federal government, the president has a White House counsel. In this case, it's me. In the federal government, all the federal agencies have their own lawyers. Here, all the executive branch agencies' lawyers work for me. And so that means the legal views on these laws really get to be conveyed in one single voice, or at least that's the hope. And then on the criminal side, another very unique thing. I think there might be one or two other states that have this, but we have a unified criminal justice system. So all the district attorneys report up to me. That's also kind of like the federal system where all the U.S. attorneys report up to the attorney general. And then there are the times where the legislature will ask for an opinion. And sometimes I have to give that attorney general opinion to the legislature. Sometimes I have to represent the court system and the judges who are sued in litigation. And then something that's even, we'll get to this probably later if we talk about regulatory reform, but something that's even more interesting is we have a legislative and regulatory legal research section. We call it Legs and Regs, LRLR. And it's our version of OIRA, the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs in the White House, that controls the regulatory agenda for the entire executive branch. We do that through the law department.
How does that work in terms of just the sheer amount of responsibility is so vast? What does your senior staff look like? How are these responsibilities divided up within the purview of your office?
It's really incredible what I've got on the team. We do have lawyers in the civil division, for example. We have lawyers who, the way I see it, is that they perform the advisory function to the agencies. And then also within the civil division, you have the lawyers who will litigate and represent the agencies. And the hope is that they're working together so that the views coming from the advisory lawyers to the client agencies are the same views that would be espoused in the litigation if there's a lawsuit. And then the senior-most level, I've got a terrific deputy attorney general for the civil division who is able to oversee both sides of the civil division and is very good at making sure that our civil division directors are also coordinated as well. And so we really work together as a team, and that's one of the best things about the job.
Last we talked, you were looking for a solicitor general. Michelle played that role in Virginia. I don't think she's available. Tell us about the importance of that job and what you're looking for, or maybe you found already in trying to fill that role.
Sure. Yeah, so I actually just sent an email to the law department earlier this morning to tell everybody in the department that we'll be bringing on next Monday a new state solicitor general. Her name is Jenna Lawrence. She was just most recently the Deputy Solicitor General of Indiana. Before that, she was an Assistant Solicitor General in Kentucky, so she's worked in 2 SG offices. She's going to do a terrific job here. And, unlike other states that sort of started with a brand new Solicitor General, she's going to have a whole team at her disposal because I've got a civil appellate section with about 8 lawyers. I've got a criminal appellate section with about 15 lawyers. And they are some of the best state appellate lawyers you can find amongst the states. They're a well-oiled machine, and they're very, very busy. And so one of the things that I've been talking to them about that Jenna will bring to the table is an extra resource in top talent who can, be less about sort of the day-to-day kind of intake of all of the appeals that come her way in terms of, reacting to that, but also looking for opportunities where we can be proactive and looking for opportunities to get involved in affirmative litigation or cases in other courts where Alaskan interests can be, communicated to those courts and potentially move the law in a way that helps Alaska and helps Alaskans. And I think because she comes to the table with great relationships in many SG offices, she'll be able to add value on day one. And we're all excited to have her start on Monday.
There you go, Michelle. We're breaking news.
That's right.
Well, it's always exciting, though, to hear different perspectives on state SG roles because it really does vary by state. I mean, some state, the Solicitor General oversees all the appellate roles, and others, it's a little bit more cabined. So it's really exciting to see how the role evolves in different states and how different attorneys general rely on their solicitors general in different ways.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And, next week she'll be up here and she'll get to meet with both teams. She'll meet with me every day. It'll take a little while, maybe another month or so, before she can actually move up to Alaska. Moving to Alaska is not so easy, as it turns out. It's, we're a long way away. We're probably closer to China than we are to DC, or, certainly closer to Tokyo than we are to DC. So it'll take a little while for her to find her place up here.
Let's talk some law geek stuff. I mean, you worked for Rachel Brand, who was the Associate Attorney General in the Trump administration, and goes way back to my days in the Bush administration. Rachel, like the first Trump administration generally, was really focused on regulatory reform, and you're picking up that mantle in Alaska. You launched recently, what is it, AO 360, right? Which is the state's regulatory reform initiative. The floor is yours. Tell us about what that is, why that was your first priority, and what you hope to accomplish there.
Sure. So I am a little bit of a reg reform nerd from my time working with Rachel in the Associate Attorney General's office at DOJ. At DOJ, we saw DOJ as a regulatory agency. We had, agencies like the DEA and ATF that issued regs and guidance and all of that. But compared to the other regulatory agencies like EPA and Interior and whatnot, we had a much smaller regulatory footprint. But we were the rule of law agency. We were litigating, we were enforcing the rule of law and constantly upholding it. And so we looked at the Justice Department as having this unique role in reg reform to basically be a model of excellence of how to do this. And so we were one of the first agencies really to take on, we were the very first agency to take on what we called informal rulemaking through regulatory guidance, or what we called sometimes sub-regulatory dark matter, where an agency will issue, a dear colleague letter or an FAQ on the website that goes way beyond the regulations and the statutes. The agency might not even have regulatory authority to promulgate regulations, but they'll put something out there meant to influence and change behaviors, and oftentimes with the threat of enforcement right behind it. And it works. Companies and law firms, they look at those guidance documents and they say, you should probably start doing these things or stop doing these other things. Otherwise, you might face an enforcement action. And we really tried to rein that in and curb that. And we did other things that, we really tried to make the Department of Justice kind of a model for other agencies, and other agencies followed suit, and they went bigger because they had a bigger footprint. Great example was the rule on rules that came out of the Department of Transportation. Steve Bradbury put out this huge just like model rule on how they were going to regulate at DOT and rein in the improper use of guidance documents. And so that's what we did at the Justice Department. So fast forward to really the last year, when I was talking with the governor a little bit about some of the things that he could do on the regulatory reform agenda. And I remember talking to him a little bit about what Governor Youngkin did with the creation of what I think they call it the Office of Regulatory Management, ORM, within the governor's office. And that ORM office really became kind of Virginia's version of OIRA that could set the regulatory agenda and drive a mission to cut regulatory red tape and permitting and make it more transparent, but cut it by 25%. And Governor Youngkin, I think, just this past summer announced that they had hit 28% of regulatory reductions in Virginia because of that. And so maybe one or two conversations that I had with the governor in December, I'd kind of forgotten about that. And then right before I took over as Attorney General, the governor issued Administrative Order 360, which was basically the same kind of thing. It was regulatory budgeting. It was a directive to all of the agencies in Alaska to first look for how many regulatory requirements you impose on the public, on regulated entities and stakeholders, count them up. That's your baseline. And then use the next 2 years to cut that amount through regulatory budgeting by 25%. And he gave the law department the reins. And so we work through our legs and regs section and the governor's office in partnership with the agencies to meet those goals. And we're at the very front end of this process. It's not easy. This stuff isn't
It's
easy.
no small task.
It's a small task. But because I nerd out on this stuff, I mean, I meet with folks every week about, what progress we're making. I think Alaska is going to be a model in reg reform. I'm actually hoping to build sort of a connection between OIRA and OMB in the White House and what we do over in the law department and kind of share best practices and whatnot.
What are some of the steps that you're taking to implement this? I mean, it's one thing to have the idea in theory, and then it seems like part of your role as Attorney General is to actually make all this happen. So what are some of the steps that you've been taking to implement?
So we have this great section that has really been tasked with putting together training materials for our agencies. And I think within my first week on the job, I was pouring through the training materials that they had already developed. And they're masterful. And so they're models of excellence for other states to borrow from. But a lot of it's constant communication with the agencies, constant check-ins with the agencies, and making sure that they know how to count their baseline, making sure that they know how to engage with stakeholders and the public, whether it's through hearings or meetings, public meetings, or whether it's just soliciting input through kind of like notice and comment type mechanisms. And then we will then work with them on the ideas that are coming in and try to evaluate what ideas will make a difference, what ideas maybe aren't worth pursuing. And then we'll make decisions at an agency by agency level, and hopefully put some points on the scoreboard next year.
In terms of your priorities as Attorney General, what are some of the other things that you're interested in and that are part of your goals?
Sure. I basically have four top priorities. Public safety is first and foremost. Consumer protection, defense of constitutional rights and especially first freedoms, and then unleashing Alaska's energy potential. On that latter front, we're the only state that has our own executive order. President Trump signed an executive order on January 20th, on his first day, all about Alaska. And a lot of that was necessary because we had just gone through 4 years of something like 50 or 60 executive actions that have been taken during the Biden administration that really, really hurt Alaska. And so we had to unwind a lot of that. And we're doing that. Right now we've got a great partner with the Trump administration. In fact, they just announced some big changes this morning that are going to be good for Alaska, and there's going to be a lot more to come. But there are a couple of things that I'll be focused on in particular, maybe adopt some special initiatives here and there. I'll probably have a quality of life crimes initiative for South Central Alaska, especially in our cities. We have a lot of low-level offenses that are happening just all over the place in downtown Anchorage, for example. And we have a whole lot of violent crime that we have to focus on, a lot of sexual assault and domestic violence in Alaska. And it's a huge state. And the criminal activity isn't just in the cities, it's in remote and rural Alaska. where we have fewer resources. And so there's no shortage of crimes for our prosecutors to focus on. But one of the things we'll be doing is using some of our resources to go after these lower level offenses that really make a difference to sort of the everyday Alaskan who wants to feel safe when going downtown.
A little bit back to your background. Apache Alaska, it's a native corporation, wasn't
That's
it?
right. That's
So,
right. Oh, no,
so
sorry. That you're asking about Apache. Apache Corporation was not a native corporation. My last job,
yeah, that
um,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
that's right. We fooled you because the Apache Corporation it's a publicly traded corporation,
The one before
independent oil
that,
and gas company. But the one that I was here, working just a few months ago,
right?
and for the last 4 years, that was a company called Bristol Bay Industrial.
That's
We
right.
were in we were an investment platform owned and controlled by Bristol Bay Native Corporation, which is an Alaska Native corporation.
That's an important community in Alaska,
That's right.
obviously. So, how does your background working for them help you to work with them and to integrate those native communities into your responsibilities and into the state's policies?
It's a huge issue, huge challenge, and with lots and lots of opportunity. Alaska really has a different kind of a deal with our Alaska Natives than what you have in the lower 48. 1971, Congress passed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, ANCSA. Is what we call it. So rather than having reservations all over Alaska, I mean, we have over 200 tribes in Alaska, but rather than having reservations all over the state, Congress actually divided the state up into 12 regions and made Alaska Native corporations and made those Alaska Native residents in those regions the shareholders. And so these were creatures of Congress, but they're corporations. They're kind of really unlike any other kind of corporations. The owners are predominantly Alaska Natives in those regions still. And so my old company was backed by Bristol Bay Native Corporation. That meant 95% of our shareholders were Alaska Natives still in the region in Bristol Bay, sustaining their traditional way of life. And they're sort of world famous for what they do in the fishing industry. The Bristol Bay rivers will feed the world half of its salmon, for example. And you could have a year where, it's just ungodly numbers of salmon, 5 species of salmon going through the rivers of Bristol Bay. And that's just one part of the state. But in terms of the Alaska Native, legal issues, they're really fascinating. I've got a civil and a criminal tribal liaison who are just world-class experts in the laws and the complexities that we're dealing with. It comes up in all sorts of ways.
Sure.
We just had an issue that we were working with the Department of Interior on, where we have at least one tribe that wants to have a casino on land where their tribe is, and they went through a process with the Department of Interior during the Biden administration. The Biden administration changed some M opinions. You know what those are? Those
Oh,
are
I do.
basically solicitor opinions that they don't have the force of law, but they almost do.
That's your shadow law that you were discussing earlier.
That's right. There was a solicitor opinion that was on the books for, decades about the complex issue of territorial jurisdiction in Alaska and how the state has jurisdiction as opposed to the tribe. And in the very end of the Biden administration, the solicitor switched positions, and that made it easier for some of these tribes that wanted casinos to apply for a permit. They did so. We had to, the state had to litigate that, and ultimately, this Department of Interior, when they looked at it, they realized, hey, this was a change in the law, and it doesn't represent actual current law. And so they went back to the old solicitor opinion. And, that it wasn't uncontroversial. And, what the governor has said is, I don't think he has any concerns about the tribes engaging in these kinds of activities, but we do have a lot of concerns over who's got territorial jurisdiction, because
Right.
that creates all sorts of challenges in terms of, law enforcement, for example, in my lane.
So you talked about unleashing Alaska's energy potential. What are some of the unique aspects of Alaska, some of the unique issues that Alaska faces when it comes to energy?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you kind of one big example. We have on the north slope of Alaska, so, north of the Arctic Circle, at the Arctic Ocean, we have lots and lots of oil and gas. Well, Alaska's produced a lot of oil, but we haven't been able to really monetize the gas. We use the gas to power and to fuel our oil and gas operations, but we've never been able to really monetize it. And so it's stranded. It's stranded natural gas reserves. And if we could figure out a way to bring that to market, I mean, it could change the world and certainly create energy independence for America. And so for decades, Alaska has been trying to figure out a way to monetize that through LNG, through pipeline, through markets in Asia and that sort of thing. But it's a very expensive series of projects. It's going to take a lot of investment. And I think this year, with the alignment that we've got with the Trump administration, we have a huge opportunity to build out sort of an Alaska LNG pipeline and the liquefaction facilities, the export facilities, so that we can actually solve Alaska's natural gas, concerns in terms of whether we can provide gas locally in the state, but also to provide vital natural gas to our allies in Asia and really monetize this in a way that we've never been able to solve before. And so that creates a lot of potential for jobs, a lot of potential for energy security, energy independence, and a lot of potential for just sort of human flourishing. We're excited about it.
That sort of segues into our next subject, Alaska's relationships, external relationships with other states and with the federal government. I want to talk about the feds, and Michelle, coming from her background, I think has some questions about the states. But what's your current relationship? I mean, I know you're just starting, right? But what's your current relationship with this administration, and what are the challenges you see in that relationship?
Yeah, we have really strong relationships. The governor's in Washington, D.C. today. Actually, he's meeting with Secretary Bergen, might be there right now, actually. He was with them earlier this morning. He has a very close relationship with the president and all of the cabinet secretaries that are really trying to work together to support Alaska. I've got relationships and friendships at sort of those, sub-cabinet level. Might know the deputy secretary or the general counsel. I have a lot of friends over at the Justice Department who worked with me the last time in the White House counsel's office. And these are valuable relationships because even when the federal government and the state are aligned in terms of policy, they are ginormous bureaucracies and things can get stuck. And sometimes if you have the relationship that you can pick up the phone and say, look, this is what's happening. This is where it's stuck. How can we unstick it? It's that relationship that can address the issue.
This law firm represented Pebble Mine for a long time.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you are. And I mean, the number of bureaucracies that this is a large gold mine opportunity in Pebble, and it's involved land transfers, and Alaska's been very cooperative, and the feds have taken different positions depending on who's in charge, but the number of stakeholders at the government level that are involved in something that large on the environmental side, on the Native Alaskan side. I mean, your former client obviously had a huge stake in that. I mean, I think your not just your skill set, but your background really makes you uniquely situated to be able to translate, from one language to another. I mean, because it sometimes is a different language at the state level and even at different agencies. You certainly have that experience from the Associate Attorney General's office, where we in civil and the Associate's office often had to step in to sort of broker deals between agencies. But Michelle, your background, in the state as a state solicitor general, gives you a unique perspective on these sorts of relationships too. And I know, as an AG, you're going to be a member of NAG, you're going to be a member of the Republican AGs Association. But Michelle, I think, has some interesting questions about that background as well.
Yeah, I'm curious, AG Cox. So, coming at the world from a federalism angle, right? I think growing up in federal government, there are a lot of benefits that folks have being federal government attorneys, or that the federal government has, even if it's just like the time frame for noticing an appeal is longer on the federal side than on the state side. What's been your experience kind of starting to seeing the world from more of a state focused perspective? Do you find that it differs a little bit from the perspective that you've had? What's it been like integrating into the multi-state world now, given the multi-state dynamics? There's a lot of coordinating that goes into amicus briefs and multi-state litigation and all that. What's your adjustment into that been like?
Yeah, so it's interesting on the state sovereignty issue. Alaska has a really strong team that has developed expertise in defending our state's sovereignty in ways that really are quite unique to the state. We have cert petition in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. We're making an argument that there's been federal overreach when it comes to public lands and when it comes to water, and who's in charge. And we believe under the laws and certainly, based on sort of the constitutional structure that we have and the deal that we struck with the United States, that the state has sovereignty there. And so that's been an interesting thing for me to kind of learn about and really get smart on and defend, because that's part of my job, is really defending the state's sovereignty. But you mentioned the multi-state aspect of this. I mean, we just had this unfavorable decision in this case come out of the Ninth Circuit, and it came out a lot earlier than we thought. But it gave us a chance to petition for cert in the U.S. Supreme Court and try to get this case heard in this October term. But we were a little bit behind the eight ball in terms of developing a multi-state amicus brief that would support us in this, and that was going to be so important for us in that case. That's when, my relationships with folks who could kind of act really quickly and maybe do me a favor to just sort of pitch in and help a new AG. We got a great brief written that was filed by the state of Idaho. And then I just started going to the AGs and the solicitors general who I knew as well and asked them to join. And so, I have really close friends like Jonathan Skrmetti, the Tennessee Attorney General, who he's also one of the only appointed
appointed by the courts, right?
For like an 8-year term. It's just like, it's amazing. But
so you have to be really polite when you're arguing to them.
My gosh. So whether it's reaching out to Jonathan or my friend James in Florida, or Mike Hilgers in Nebraska, Brenna Bird in Iowa, and the solicitors general who I've known over the years, whether it's Eddie LaCour in Alabama or Scott Stewart, who worked with me at the Justice Department, who's SG of Mississippi, reaching out to them and using those relationships, we got 21 states on that brief on an issue that I think a lot of observers are looking at and saying, wow, this is really an Alaska specific state sovereignty issue. But the brief makes the point that there are some broader principles at stake here: the equal footing doctrine, textualism, Ninth Circuit nonsense, all sorts of things that other SGs and AGs could get on board with.
Well, thank you for plugging our future shows, because Brenna Bird is going to be a guest on our show at some point. I just spoke to her last week. So, but this last segment, I want to talk about clients, right? Our clients and the corporate clients that are out there. What should, a corporate law department expect in dealing with the Alaska Attorney General? I
think they should expect transparency and fairness and a commitment to the rule of law. I think, I've worked on both sides of, all three sides: federal, state, corporate, fourth side of being on at the law firm as well, representing companies. And, I would say, like, one of the things that I always bore in mind when I was on the private side of the V was looking for ways to be collaborative, looking for ways to see what success looks like for all of those concerned, because what success looks like for one AG might not be the same as another AG. And understanding, what matters. Is it the public policy goal? Is it the civil penalty amount? Is it the, restitution for victims? Is it the consent decree and injunctive terms? Like, what is it that moves the needle, and what's the principle that you can kind of help that AG accomplish with a reasonable settlement? And frankly, I think AGs also should look for what success would look like for the company and for the defendants as well, understanding that what they're trying to do is build a business and keep in business and do the right thing and whatnot. But driving up compliance costs in a way that helps no one, helps no one. And so understanding those kinds of issues, and how to work together, I think that's the key in getting to a good place in any kind of resolution.
So if our clients were to get a letter or a CID from your office, viewing it not just as something that's purely adversarial, but an opportunity to have a back and forth in communications is something that you view as a positive, and something that their outside counsel can consider in representing their clients in a productive way.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think one of the things that I bring to the table is I've been in all of those different chairs, and I'm a reasonable guy, and I care a lot about the law. I care a lot about consumers, and I understand, that people have different motivations, in terms of why they do things. I understand that there's some regulatory ambiguities and uncertainties, and you might have like a hot document somewhere that makes it look like, like, oh, I got a slam dunk. But there's also a lot of gray area as well. And that's what I think I bring to the table, is sort of an understanding of all of the sides of an argument, and then a commitment to get it right.
Well, AG Cox, we really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us, and I found the discussion really interesting and helpful. So really appreciate having this time with you.
Happy to do it.
I want to give you one last opportunity to plug something you care about. And I know you've had a focus on education,
That's right.
especially since your time in Alaska. Tell us about what you've done, because I think this is really interesting. I want to give you the floor to talk about that, and then we'll sign off.
Yeah, sure. So, I care a lot about education. And so here I'm really, taking off the attorney general
Yeah.
hat and just talking about, as a human being and a dad and a citizen. My wife and I have spent a lot of time really thinking about the best ways to educate our children and the community's children. We believe very strongly in classical education. And it's the traditional way of educating kids that existed for really thousands of years. The best way to summarize it, it's about training children in virtue and in wisdom, right? Teaching them knowledge, but also virtues like prudence and humility and charity and whatnot, so that they become good humans.
So, in your purely private capacity, before you were Attorney General, you started a school.
I started a school, and so my wife and I, we teamed up with Hillsdale College, which is just a beacon of light in terms of classical education. We met with Dr. Larry Arnn and his team, a couple of years ago, and decided we wanted to bring that model, that level of excellence in education, to Alaska. We will open our doors next August as a K through 6 school, private, classical, Christian school, and then eventually grow year by year and ultimately become a K through 12 school with hopefully, a couple of sections a grade. And we're really excited about it. We've got a terrific headmaster. She is just a, 60-hour week CEO, knows how to get things done. She sees around corners, and she's very smart and very strategic. And we're happy to be backing her.
Well, that gives our listeners real insight into what kind of person you are. It's a testament to your commitment to the community, your wife's commitment to the community. It's one of the reasons we've been friends for a long time. So, Attorney General Cox, thank you greatly for giving us insights into your job. Good luck with it, and come by and see us again.
All right, sounds good. Well, thanks again for having me. It was a privilege to do this, and I look forward to seeing you soon. I'll be in DC maybe in a few weeks, so I'll look you up.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to On the Agenda from Steptoe. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss future episodes. To learn more about Steptoe, visit steptoe.com. When the stakes are high, experience matters.